Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm your host, I'm Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I am on a quest to understand everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And I am delighted to be joined by Stuart, one of the original founders of GDL London. Stuart, I'm going to bring you on screen. Give me 2 seconds as I press the button. Stuart, there you are. I can see you at last. How are you doing, Stuart?
Yeah, really good, really good. Exciting times. Well, I say exciting times. We're wrapping up towards the end of the year, which is always exciting. coming in to have some nice festive season. As we speak, actually, I'm getting ready to attend IRL next week, and then then we're looking at a new year, new start. Should
New
be
year,
good.
new start. And I'm looking forward to a month off. Genuinely, I am off from the 8th of December to the 8th of January. Yeah, right. I'm going to get calls every day.
Yeah, I was going to say, you and I, we end up working deep into sometimes Christmas Eve.
And I'm so desperately going to try not to, because
same.
It is so. I don't know about you, but it's been let's face it, it's been a hard year, and for everybody concerned. And obviously, at the same time, I don't know if you've noticed, I think particularly on Steam, there have been more games released than I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
So I thought today we'd have a quick chat, kind of looking at the state of where we are in game dev, and particularly looking at the kind of publisher versus developer view. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So basically, obviously, for those who don't know, when I'm not doing podcasts, I am a publisher for a group called Fundamental Games, and our publishing label is Jetpack Collective, and we're focused particularly on live ops games. And whilst we've got lots of games in the background that we try to sort of support and get ready for live ops, we actually made our first launch on the 9th of November. So if I'm looking grayer, older than ever, you'll know why. So Stuart, tell everybody about what you're up to.
Oh, I'm up to a million things right now. Similar to you, really,
as a developer.
Yeah. So similar to you, really, like at the beginning of the year. Well, actually, studio-wise, with my studio, everything has been doing really well, ticking over. We're actually ahead of schedule for where I was hoping we might be. My studio being Fribbly Games, for people who are just listening in and have no idea. And yeah, we're working on our first title. And yeah, everything's going really well. I've spent the last 3 months, 3-4 months, doing loads of searching for all of the opportunities. I've now got an immense spreadsheet filled with all of the investors, publishers, funds, and I've set up that spreadsheet so that I can track my progress for each application. Your name's actually on there for one of the things.
Oh, worry.
But just so I've got a column for like people that I know that are connected to it, that I know personally, that I could maybe talk about it.
That's a really good thing to do anyway, generally. I mean, we do the same thing. I mean, yes, I'm lucky because I spent so long as a Unity evangelist. I'm connected to like nearly 11,000 people on LinkedIn. That's just the people who said yes.
Yeah.
And being able to leverage that, I don't leverage that sounds terrible, but be able to respond to that and actually help people as you go along is massively important. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I just thought it was to remind people that's good.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, when you don't know, you don't know, and then when you start to get, I'm literally like right now, I'm really loving this like boss level era that I'm going through, and like I'm getting knee deep in documentation and
loving that documentation.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, I don't know how this happened to me. Getting into like Google Docs and firstly doing like a brain dump of like a business plan or a budget and like all of this stuff, and then refining it, and like a pitch deck, pulling everything that you need together for the pitch deck, and then sharing that pitch deck with a few people and being like, is this crazy? And people going, oh, I really like that, that's kind of cool. And then you're like, okay. And so we're just like ramping up really now, ready for the beginning of next year, when I will be in what we all lovingly call pitch hell. Just throwing my pitch at anyone who is willing to look at it. But yeah, one of my favorite bits.
I was just going to say, it's a good job we haven't had an economic crisis followed by a war in Ukraine, followed by a war in
there's so many
Italy.
mental factors. It's not even. And the thing is, yeah. So I keep having these like little moments where I'm like, oh, this is really cool. This is like I'm having a mini win. And then I go on social media and I think I start typing out, oh, I did this week, and I go, no, I'll just keep it to myself for now. I think I'll wait. It's hard, isn't it? You don't know when to sing and shout about all the cool stuff that's happening. But yeah, so my favorite thing recently was doing the projections for the game that we're making based on our not quite competitors, but like other games in our genre that have done similar things and done similar numbers, and coming up with that whole like, this is a low estimate of what we might achieve, this is a mid estimate, and then sky's the limit.
Crazy. Actually, there's an interesting one because I spent a lot of time. So when we were consulting before we decided to set up as a publisher, a lot of the work we did was due diligence for game studios, but often it was the investors asking us to kick the tire of the game. And yes, we still do that consultancy, by the way. I didn't say that. But the point was that really understanding what makes a game tick. And actually, the interesting thing is we use the same principles in reverse, essentially, when we're screening a game. So I think it's an interesting kind of like duality of like the role of a CEO, whether you're a publisher or a developer. You're often doing similar things, but with different kind of takes on it. So when you're talking about looking at the high, medium, low, for the investors that we work with, they're going to ignore your high and medium. They're only interested in your low. In fact,
and they'll do their own.
And they'll do their own. And sometimes they'll pay people like me to do it. So I've got to the stage where I've kind of got a bit of PTSD over spreadsheets.
Sure.
I've done too many of them.
Yeah.
And the economy is a bit too heavy. Anyway, but working out how you make assumptions, and actually we did a lot of training people on how to approach it as well. We're a bit weird. We try to teach people to get better at being able to do that stuff, so that when they come to us with a game, they've already done a lot of the legwork. That's our aim anyway.
I would say a fair amount of stuff that I have been doing, I learned from you and from hanging out with you and listening to all of the.
That's just too kind. Yeah.
Especially, I can't remember exactly what it was that we were talking about when we were at Develop, but you were sitting down and another developer sat down next to you, and they were asking you questions, and I was like, I'm going to sit down right next to you, and I'm going to listen to all of the gold that is coming out of your mouth.
It's not gold. So I'm great at the 1,000-foot picture, but everything collapses down to reality at the end of the day. So whilst I may have a reasonable ego, I'm fortunate I'm fairly grounded on this stuff. But the thing I think is really interesting about that is that again, let's think about that perspective. So when you're looking at your forecasting, what kind of assumptions, what kind of thinking are you putting in when you're deciding that? Because I think that's a profoundly interesting thing that other people may not understand when they're looking at their game as a developer. It'd be interesting if you describe what you're trying to do, and then if I look at how I look at it from a due diligence or from a screening point of view.
You mean like how I formulated how I pulled together?
Yeah, well,
research.
What drove your thinking? When you were saying, okay, these numbers, how did you derive those numbers? What was the inspiration for that?
So I looked at somewhere in the region of like 8 very specific games that were either directly in the same genre as us, or were close enough.
What do you mean by genre, though? Again, I'm being a bit picky here.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't think it's genre. I think it's about the same audience interest.
Yeah,
which is not quite the same thing.
This is what. Yeah, that is exactly what I meant. So, so there are games. So our game is a I should know this off by heart. The thing is,
I'm testing you.
we've had to narrow it down several times because we were like, and also it's changed a bit during the process. So what I was calling it at the beginning, we're no longer calling it. But essentially, it's point and click mystery adventure puzzler game, and thematically, it's a fantasy world with witches and magic and potions and spellcasting and tarot. So it's very So we looked at games that were thematically similar to ours, as well as genre, like having genre crossover, because our game is across a few genres there. But so we looked at the titles that fit closely enough with the audience, and then had a look at their performance and what how much they sold for, how often they went on sale for, and like a real some of them you can get pretty good numbers on what they made, and others you kind of have to piece it together yourself.
Just a quickie, so because I know there were people out there going, yeah, but he's got data. How did he get data? But by the way, I know how hard that getting data is. What tools did you use to get that information?
So my main ones were Steam Spy, and what's the other one? It's like a little niche.
SteamDB?
Possibly.
Okay.
It's like mostly green.
I don't think it's SteamDB. I think it's mostly blue. Oh, maybe I'm misremembering. Goodness. But there are. So I just threw a little aside here because this is the one thing I get asked an awful lot, and actually something I struggle with. So Steam Spy is the one I tend to use. Now the problem with Steam Spy is that they used to be perfectly good in terms of accuracy and information, and they've done the best they can, but Steam decided to change all the rules. So now we have an interesting factor where you will see that because they're based on the number of owners of the game, you will suddenly find that there's a massive drop in the number of owners over time. One of the best things you can do with Steam Spy is to subscribe to the Patreon. It's about £600 or something. But then when you do that, you can actually get an export of the day-by-day download number or owner numbers. And then you can get the price on average, the price that day, which means you can actually work out what the actual price on average was for the game properly. So you can pull together this massive spreadsheet if you're really, crafty about it, looking at each of these games you've selected on Steam Spy, and then get the number of owners on average per day, and you can build this fantastic graph of what the ownership looks like. But because it has this mismatch, because if you have something like a free sale, after a certain period of time, they're no longer considered owners, therefore they're gone from the list. Does that mean the game got the money? Or didn't the game get the money? And you don't know. You can't know. So you have to make some assumptions. But it's really interesting using this kind of like, how do you get hold of data? How do you apply that data? And I've got to say now, I kind of feel it's not reliable enough. How do you feel, Stuart?
I think, like I said, we did pull from a number of different places.
And they're all different, aren't they? They don't add up quite, even though they're from the same source, essentially.
Yeah, but I think the thing is what they tend to, if you're smart about it, what you will do is you'll look across all of them across the board and create an average from all of, because I mean that's what you end up doing, even if you have very precise
That's
data.
exactly what you end up doing.
And then you get to plug in your numbers based on that. So if this would be the average price that we sold at, this would be the average number of downloads we can expect over this length of time, and so this is what we expect over, and that's when I then did forward projections. So we did a 5 and 10 year projections, but also
really,
but so some of them don't last that long because of the area that we're in, but the thing is, we're not just looking at the game that we're currently producing. So my 10-year involves looking at what else I would do
multiple games
with the IP, with multiple games. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, the average I think is really key. One of the tricks I use in my models generally is I'll pick about 10 games. So the medium model is the 10 games averaged. Sometimes that's the optimistic model, depending on how, because you'll often find you've got these outliers in the genre that are just, you're never going to get that number.
Yeah.
So I'll often include all of the games in the high level model and then take out the top 2 games to get my medium model, for example. I will often do a low model, but I generally do that for myself only, because as a trained product owner, that's kind of how I got started in this stuff. I want to know at the point you break the game. So you don't want to share the break point necessarily with the financer. I'm not hiding anything from anybody. It's just a different way of thinking, which is, if I don't know what my final break even point could be, what's my worst case scenario, and everything went wrong, that I need to know what that baseline is so that I can actually check what good looks like. But when I'm pitching, I want to show you what I think the medium scenario is, i.e. what is the likely scenario.
Yeah.
But I also want to show you that this game has the potential to upsell and do better, which is why we have the high level scenario. But if it's not based on what games in the market can do, what's the point?
Yeah.
So that's
it's interesting, because I did a similar thing. I avoided adding in games that I knew were just like mega hits, and like you say, like the outliers. I tried to literally tried to pick games that I thought would be, if we were them. And the other thing is, what else did I look at? No, it's gone. But yeah, I did a very similar thing.
Yeah, and I think it's what most people do, things like that, where you've got to find some source of data that you got some credibility. And I think, and this is the way the kind of publisher and the investor perspective comes in. Are we actually worried about the numbers? And I don't think we are. I think most investors, publishers aren't specifically worried about the numbers. What's important to them is that you have thought it through at a high level of detail, that you're applying a degree of expertise, insight, rational thought, and you can justify and back up that information. I think that part of it is probably the more important factor than the specific numbers. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to know that the numbers you came up with are going to give me my uplift, because if I'm going to invest in you as a game, I need to make a profit. My investors need to see me make a profit that's going to up 10x their investment.
Actually, so this is the other thing that I did. My projections were based on if we did it alone, like without a publisher, and I've tried to do that with everything. Like, this is what I think we can achieve if no one helps us out. So that they
presumably you included a lot of marketing spend in that, as well as development spend.
Yeah. So literally just figuring out, how far I can get without going. It'd be really nice to have some help, and then being able to say to them, because if someone looks at those numbers and they go, "Oh, they're pretty good," and I go, "Yeah, they're pretty good," and that's without you. Imagine if we add you into the mix and like your expertise, and then how we can get with that.
But that's an interesting one as well, because if you think about it, one of the difficulties, if you take that pitch deck to a publisher as opposed to taking that pitch deck to an investor is going to be very happy to see you've got marketing in there. Great. And there's no problem if you put a line that shows differentiation between that and the publisher. But some publishers may see that as a problem, because you're saying I wouldn't, but I know some would. The reason is that some would say, but we're doing that, why you've got it in your fund requirement? Because if you're going to a publisher and say, I want this much money, and the money you're asking for has the marketing in it, they may have more cost-effective ways of doing marketing than you. For example, a big publisher with a large existing, stable, addressable audience can actually reach out to that audience without necessarily spending actual pound notes. They can use all of the social levers effectively as you could if you're spending that money. And that's a difficult thing to sort of put in that. So if you're asking for the marketing money, well, who's paying for the marketing money? Well, they are. Are they double part charged? So all I'm saying is, that's one of the interesting challenges when you're pulling together documentation, because you don't do the job twice.
Yeah.
But your audience is going to have a different perspective. So as a publisher, I'm going to assume all of my costs are going to come on top of that. You know, the marketing, the planning, the targeting, the UA spend, the social management, in our case, we do live ops as well. So we've got to take that into account. So all of those factors are going through my head when I see your documents. So I just mention it because I think it's a really interesting challenge that any developer has, is making sure that what they present, the audience can understand it in the terms they're looking for. That makes sense?
Yeah, that does. I mean, yeah. So in our pitch deck, we don't have the marketing spend included, but in the research for how much money I could in the competitive research, I brought those numbers together based on if we were going on. So yeah, but it is interesting, isn't it? Because you do need to, and this is a lot of stuff that I'm doing right now, is in my spreadsheet, not only have I got who I'm contacting, how I'm contacting, what connections I might have, but also things that they will specifically want to see. So I've got an entire bracket for whether they want to see a pitch deck and a playable demo, or both and something else. But yeah, so I've got, so that each time I go to any of these people, I can look at my pitch deck and go, these slides don't need to go to this person, or we need those slides for this person specifically.
At what point do you pull together the playable demo? Because the reason I ask is I don't do much of the BD anymore because we have a BD guy, and Ella, my business partner, does a lot of that stuff because I've got too much else to think about with marketing and all that. When we do that, we're often sit there when people will pitch to us, and one thing we always say is we want to see something of the game immediately. So I'm okay personally seeing gameplay video. Do you include that in your pitch decks?
I plan to. I haven't got it in there currently, just because some things are still changing, and I don't want to put anything in the pitch deck that I then turn up to a pitch and go, "Oh yeah, no, that's an old GIF," or anything like that. But yeah, because we have a playable demo. This is the other thing. Like, I know that there are people out there that, like I say, I've got it in the spreadsheet that you can just approach with a pitch deck. You don't even need to have anything made. And then there are people.
That list. I want that list.
And then there are people. Well, what I have discovered recently is that those are fewer and further between.
Oh,
mostly they want to see you build something.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a bit. Yeah. Actually, no, let's talk about it now. Because, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is that I think particularly driven by mobile, particularly driven by data. Again, back to that moment when we do a pitch, we'll have somebody may hopefully give me a gameplay video, then talk about their game and their structures. I have a bit of a foible. I don't like design pillars as a concept. I think of your vision of your game needs to be a vector, but then we are doing live ops games, so maybe that makes us a bit weird. But I want to know what that game is, but I'm really, really interested in the team delivering it and what their kind of capabilities are and history and stuff like that, because 9/10 of a game investment, whether it's a publisher or an investor, I think comes down to, do you trust the team to do what they say they're going to do?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. But I'm also interested in data. In fact, this is what I think has been the magic of what made mobile so successful. And I think it is affecting PC games and console games in an equal measure now, although it took a bit longer for that to happen. So I'm looking at what's your day one retention look like? Now, that's particularly important for a pay up front game. Sorry, what was I say? That's particularly important for a free-to-play game. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it is also important for a pay-up-front game. The reason I think it's important for a pay-up-front game is not because I think long-term retention is the key factor of a pay-up-front game. No. Because it isn't. If you play it, you finish it, you finish. There, done. But it's more about, if they aren't satisfied, they're not going to finish it. So if I know what day one retention looks like, it's an indicator, a kind of ballpark of, are they going to refund it? Are they going to carry on playing it to the next level? Are they going to make it something that they fall in love with? And if a pay up front game is presented to me and I can't get that sense, some indicator of how much players really care about that game. And retention is the only number I can think of where I can get an indicator that's not biased by opinion.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I get told off by a bunch of devs for being, no, you're just talking about free to play. I am not. I'm genuinely not.
Yeah.
It's just that I cannot find a single piece of data for a pay upfront game that lets me know if players care about it that's not retention based. You can do surveys, but this is why I think
I guess because even if people leave a review, we know that the volume of reviews are low. Like if you have to have loved a game to leave a positive review.
Yeah.
Whereas if you hated a game, you will, or if a game bugged you, you are.
Or it was a bad Tuesday.
Yeah, you're far more likely to get a bad review. So reviews, I've seen quite a few people who have like a way of looking at reviews. Ed, who used to be one of our podcasters, he used to look at Steam reviews, and he had like a really good system for doing a real rough figuring out of how much money that game may have made, and then tried to look at the actual data from that he could find of how much it made, and he wasn't too far off based on that.
Okay.
But I think that it has got harder and harder and harder for that kind of a thing to work. So I think you're right. I think it's how would you know?
I mean, and I've got to base it on something,
Yeah.
I mean, the trouble with not having, because we don't have bottomless pockets. I mean, we're basically bootstrapped with some investors who've been kind enough to support us to be able to make a game publisher, which is a non-trivial process, and not something I'd recommend everybody try and do without, unless you want to look grey and bald like me. Basically, don't do it. It's scary, and it's a hell of a lot of work. However, what's been fascinating is being able to see the impact you can have on a team when you get them to think about these longer term pieces, how you get them to think about engagement, how you think about the player experience in a different way than maybe, because I mean, from what I know of you do give a monkeys about the player experience.
You're
not just trying to make a game that you want to play. You're trying to find a game for an audience.
Yeah.
How rare do you think that is?
I think it depends. And so I'm like your classic, I say classic, romantic author. Like I do believe in creating a beautiful thing and it being a work of art and all of that kind of stuff. But I have over time, because I've been a freelance creative my entire life, so I have over time been harshly tempered into shape. There's only so much romanticy that you can take part in before the real world starts slapping around. The thing is though, like very early on for me, I started to try and commercialize my art. I went straight into painting canvases and selling my art on a market stall. So I am lucky to have that, but I think that a lot of people, everyone thinks they have a good game idea, right? That's what we all know that, and I think
everyone's got a good game idea in them. Whether this idea is good,
potentially
different subject.
yeah, but it's a double-edged sword, though, right? Because you need that naivety, otherwise you wouldn't get into it in the first place, and you wouldn't get as far as you get if you knew everything you knew before you tried doing it. But at the same time, I think a lot of developers are blinkered to it, and they just go, "Yeah, this." Like maybe they grew up with a game that they loved, and they're making something similar, and they're like, "I know this game is good. I've played a game just like it. It will do really well." And then they get so far into it, and they start. And a lot of people do that, like guarding it to themselves, so that when they do go, "Ta-da!" people go, "Oh yes, that's right," and they're like, "No, it's great," but. Yeah.
But also you get the opposite, where a game blows up and the auteur decides that they are more important than everybody else around them. And in fact, there's a particular, I won't say who it was, there's a particular game that blew up that was looking for monetization advice at one point. We liked the game. We liked we thought it was a good concept, and the people who introduced us were good friends of ours. So we thought, yeah, we'll offer to help out. Next thing I know, they put an article out saying that all publishers are evil, and I took that very personally.
Yes, you would. Yeah.
I'd say, but I'm the guy that's supposed to try and make it possible to survive, and I want to make it so that you design games that players want to fall in love with and want to keep on playing and hopefully keep on paying for, but not because they have to, but because they want to. Anyway, I know I kind of I got a sore spot about this, but my point is more that it's easy, and this is the reason why I thought this would be an interesting kind of perspective. It's easy for the developer side to forget what the publisher is trying to do, and it's often easy for the publisher to forget what the developer is trying to do. And I think if people like me squash your creative ambition for the project, we end up with basically crap. And that's no good to us as a publisher. Whereas if you don't listen to our desire for commercial, or you assume that our desire for a commercial perspective means we're evil, then you don't get to make the next game. And players actually probably don't get a worse game. I honestly, genuinely believe smart monetization design, relevant to the game, is the most important part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
It makes the game better. But it's hard when you've got so many bad actors out there, so many mistakes being made.
But there definitely is a fair number of bad actors, for sure.
Oh yeah.
But I do think that, and I might be in a bit of a biased position because I almost exclusively only hang out with indie developers. But there seems to be amongst us more naivety than anything else. And I mean, this is why I created Game Dev London, to try and support indies to get into the industry and help them understand all of this stuff. And on the flip side of that, like recently with all the layoffs that happened, I keep seeing so many posts from people who are saying, just start your own studio, screw the big guys, just start your own studio. And I'm like, that's not great advice. That's really not great advice.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but I'm just going to check on something. So a lot of people are really obviously going through a really hard time at the moment, in a really difficult period. And the reality of this life, unfortunately, is that redundancies happen and that game projects do happen. And often that's about mistakes, but it could also be about basically underperforming experiences. And for the best will in the world, no matter how much you try, sometimes you will not get the revenue you need to be able to keep going. And that is tragic, and it's horrifying. And as somebody who's had to make redundancies in the past, and being made redundant multiple times, I've got used to that emotion. So please don't take this as flippant. But I do think one of the other things, the flip side of that, is that when the bigger studios make these amazingly talented people redundant at exactly the right point, where those studios have the finances to be able to give proper redundancy to the individuals concerned, at that point, we often see a reasonable amount of cash amongst a reasonably good bunch of people who are suitably talented. And if they can get the right advice, if they can get the right structures in place, and they can work out what the right commercial project is, we're going to see things that are going to change the world in what our expectations of what games can be.
Do you feel like that? Because it used to be that was a very strong case. Like people, you would see this team of 4 friends from a AAA studio starting up a new studio, and everyone goes, "Take my money." I feel like a lot of that has fallen away. A lot.
It has. It has. Don't get me wrong. That is fallen away. That's kind of not what I was going to. There will be a lot of, to quote, blood on the carpet type moments. Lots of people trying really hard to make games without the commercial expertise, without the support, and they will not get the finance they need because there's only a small amount of finance going around at the moment. This is a terrible time for that. what I'm kind of getting at though is that there will be clusters of innovation that come out. It will be painful for a lot of people, and I've been involved in so many different startups and activities, and as a consultant, as a supporter, as a mentor, as whatever else. Let's face it, the vast majority of studios fail. And it makes me cry. Genuinely, it's like heartbreaking.
It's 9 out of 10.
Yeah. I thought it was worse than that, but that's.
I think.
Yeah.
As far as I was aware, statistic that I've had, but I mean, it's not just studios; it's startups. 9 out of 10.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, 9 out of 10. Yeah, fail.
9 out of 10 fail.
That doesn't though mean that they're not worth doing.
No, I just think that I'm seeing too much advice that is literally that plain, no context, no like. That occasionally there's someone who's like, and this is the stuff kind of feels predatory, is where they go, and if you're looking to start, come and have a chat with me, and I'll like try and help walk you through it. I'm okay with people
the agents who want to take like 20% of any investment you raise, but not actually do any work. There are some good ones out there, by the way. I'm just highlighting the worst case scenarios. You'll get people who will take you on a ride, or they'll try and get you to other things. But again, there are tools like that. So I talked to AWS getting credits. There are a bunch of things out there you can do stuff. And let's face it, you can get started with a game engine without having any upfront costs. Ongoing costs, yes, and particularly now, but we're not going to talk about Unity. I promised I wasn't going to talk about Unity. No, don't talk about Unity.
Right.
That's for another time. But yeah, But I think again, I think this goes back to this publisher versus developer. But there's actually some synergy here in terms of the stresses that anyone who's running a team has to go through. And it strikes me that what we're describing here is that it's not just about do we have the money, it's not just do we have the people, it's not just do we have the product, but actually are we able to go through this process? Are we actually mentally ready for a very, very hard process that's going to be full of disappointment, frustration, and is likely to fail? And are we really prepared to lose? At the same time, we get to be liberated. We get to make decisions ourselves and empower our own processes. It is a very peculiar state of mind, I think, to make the decision to start up. Is that fair?
Yeah, this is exactly my point. I think is that there's not enough preparation or not enough information for people to say, like, if you do want to start a studio, like one of the things that whenever anyone comes up to me and they say I'm thinking of starting a studio, obviously I go, that's amazing, that's absolutely great. I never just go, well, good luck. But I do always say, or try and temper it with advice that is something along the lines of, do you want to run a business, or do you want to make a game? Because making a game is fun, and making a game is something that everyone, a lot of people do. We've got a load of hobbyists like in the Game Dev London community, people that love making games. They don't care about making money. They will literally make a game every week.
Fantastic.
But if you don't, and that's because they are very aware.
And I want to do more of that. I just have no time left because I'm spending all my time doing the commercial stuff.
So
some of my favorite things is when some of my favorite things is when I get called in by a team who are going, I don't know what game to make. I know I've got these goals. What do I make with it? How do I sort it out? I literally did one recently where I just went in and I just worked out what was important for success. What the hell's that got to do with that game design? But actually, as soon as you do this kind of stuff and you actually work out what they think is success, even if it is the hobby of making a game, even if it's just the reward of peers viewing your stuff, all these goals are entirely valid. And importantly, if you understand them properly, it's so much easier to make the game design match the ambition.
Yeah.
I think people forget that actually you've got to sit back and work out what success looks like to you. And it's okay if it's a hobby. That's all right. Nothing wrong with that. But
I also saw
okay
recently someone on LinkedIn posted, if you were just starting out now, like starting your own studio, and you had financial backing, what would be the game that you made? And I immediately chimed in because I wanted to make sure there was some tempered advice. Luckily, there was actually quite a bit. but I wanted to make sure there was some tempered advice. And I said, if I was in that situation, I just started my studio and someone has given me a lump sum of money and I want to figure out what game I'm going to make, I sit around the table with the team that I have and I say, what do you love playing? What do you love playing? Figure out what we love playing, figure out grab the latest trends of 2023, see where there's some crossover so that because you need a game that will fit somewhere in the market, but you also need the passion to take it from God, I love making games to God, can we please release this game?
And not confusing it with God, I love playing games.
Yeah.
That's the other one I find.
You probably same as
Also,
me get a lot of parents come up to you because obviously we both like teach. Get a lot of parents come up to you and go, my son loves computer games, loves computer. So I knew he'd have a really good time here today, and I go, yeah, he didn't. They did not enjoy today.
Yeah.
You think that they did because you're like, I don't know what my kid likes, but they like computer games, and now I've learned that can be a job that they can do. I mean, it makes sense. I'm a parent, and I will look at my boys and I go, if you're going to work, you might as well do something that you enjoy. But at the same time, some of the best people, or some of the happiest people at least, are working a job that they just do because they can, and the thing that they love doing, they keep completely separate from it.
Yeah, and I think keeping it frankly, I think that's one of the reasons why my marriage has lasted more than 30 years is because basically my wife has no interest in games at all. She keeps me from going completely stark staring mad. But I think this is the differentiation between playing and analyzing and making games. But even in the making games, I think there's so many roles that we can deal with. There are people who do QA. Now, playing a game and doing QA is a completely different experience, although it does involve playing games, obviously. But the ability to be able to go and do that same little moment 400 times is not the same as going and playing a game.
Yeah.
That ability to be able to understand why that mechanic in that moment worked, that's game design. But having a passion to want to get that right and understanding how that affects emotion, how that affects retention, how that affects monetization, those things are very different skills. They are skills. But frankly, I would be horrified if I was in a situation where I didn't know what the game was, what at least one of the games I was making would be, if I was in a situation where somebody had given me money to build a studio. Because what the heck? Have they not done their due diligence?
Yeah. Well, I think that this person in particular, they're involved in investing in things, so they've got like some money. It sounds like they probably have their own money behind them, and they've gone, right, I've got the money.
Yeah.
Now I want to try and make a game, which is dangerous.
I get that. But also, oh my goodness, I have so many things I would like to make. For example, if there was no budget, I would like to apply all the lessons I learned writing these 4-hour LARPs in order to create different forms of narrative based on perspective. So I could build, if I had unlimited cash, I could change the way you make a game like Baldur's Gate so profoundly. In my ego, obviously, don't pay attention to reality. But the way I would do that is a very simple thing, very simple change, that there is an ongoing beat that is updated every month that affects the environment, whether you're there or not. And if you are there and you act upon it, you can act upon the impact of that part of the story. Now, that sounds like a very difficult thing to write, but I've done that. That's what you learn if you write live action role-playing games with 50 people in a room who have to find out what's going on and complete that in a nice, neat fashion. So in 4 hours' time, everyone gets a satisfactory ending. It's a very different way of writing, and I wish I could start applying that. But that's never going to happen because the risk factors, the cost of doing it, the fact that I'm not a narrative writing game person in my CV, despite the fact that's what I've done for most of my life because of the fun part, that's the hobby part of what I do, that stuff will never happen. And in some ways, this is the tragedy of the capitalist kind of process that we operate in. And don't get me wrong, I'm not having a particularly anti-capitalist moment, but it is a tragedy that there's so much talent out there that could be leveraged and could do interesting stuff, but because we're always having to go cap in hand and get an immediate return, it's really difficult.
But this is also why indie studios pivot way easier than big studios.
Yeah.
Big studios go, we know that worked.
Yeah.
And they probably have some really creative people in their team going, do you know what we could do next? And they go, well, the audience is going to want more of what we just did. And like, but we could really, we've got money now. We could really do this. I think it takes, there's a certain stage, I think, within a studio, if a studio is on that growth trajectory, where they can do that. But most of the big guys now just wait and see what the little guys do. But even then, there's not a lot of people, not a lot of big studios that are actually taking the explosive success from indie and going, we could do something like that. They still mostly stay in their lane.
But what they did do last year, last year, whenever it was, before the big mess blew up, you started seeing a massive increase in acquisition of studios. So, with people like Mediatonic being purchased at the time, I know there's a counterpart to that story, but we'll get to that in a bit. But Mediatonic, that's a good example of a studio that had been working there, done incredible stuff for a long, long time, a long, 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 hard slog. Then they have their massive hit, and then they get acquired. Unfortunately, now, because of the economic climate, there's been a trimming of that team, as I understand it. I don't know the details, but my observation is that. So we have this ebb and flow, which is where we see the opportunity for a lot of small studios is to be acquired and then to get out. And that can be great in terms of bigger studios effectively giving the ambition for smaller studios to do the hard graft. But we're still talking about a lottery ticket because you've got to do the hard graft. You've got to make the game. The game's got to be successful. It's got to be so successful that you get other people's attention. You've then got to get the deal, and then you've got to get acquired. I mean, that's a lot of risks and steps. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's too many.
So this is why I focus on live ops. To be honest, this is why because as a publisher, we're trying to step out and say, okay, how do we be different? And if we can be different because we can understand the thing that I've been doing for most of my career about how you sustain a game live, then hopefully we can find this blue ocean opportunity. But the reality is, most developers aren't ready for it. So I've got to train enough of them up to be able to be in a position where they've got that instinct. And I'm going to support them through that process. And frankly, if you're a small studio, if a small publisher trying to do all that at the same time as launching games and running games with no budget, it's a tough call. It's a long way to the top when you. I'm sure there's a song in there, rock and roll. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was formulating my game and I first came to you with it, and I was in this space where I had to consider two things. One was there's innovation to be had in a narrative-driven game that is a successful live ops game, and I'm a brand new studio that has no track record, and I need a title out there to put my flag in the ground.
Yeah.
Do I dare take the road that is the potential amazing innovation that could skyrocket me to who knows where, or do I take a slightly safer path, because it is only slightly safer, a slightly safer path.
Safer, yeah.
And that was what we ended up obviously take the path that we ended up taking, the less obvious risk.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is like finding a way to get. In fact, actually, maybe this is what comes down to is when we make the call that we're going to take on that mantle of the CEO or to do that startup. We've got to find that team that we feel comfortable with. But we've also got to work out what are the ways we're going to demonstrate that we can do the job we want to do. And I often talk about this as a bit like sailing, because in sailing, the wind is in a certain direction. You can't control the direction of the wind. You've got to get to where you're going to go. So you've either you're going to get to go in the straight line, but often you can't. So you have to tack and jibe in order to get the right positioning, and finding the direction you're going to go is going to continually change, but your overall strategy is you have a destination you're aiming for. So thinking about your strategy as a vector, that's why I don't like pillars. What is the vector today? Well, the vector today is this, because we're doing that, but the overall arching goal is to get over there. And you look at the thing, the tides, the winds, the forces against you, the resources you've got, what can you actually achieve? And you tack and jibe until you get to the point where you're actually able to get to your actual destination, and not getting caught up in trying to get there directly, and instead working out what can I do, what's going to get me closest to where I want to be.
All the while trying to avoid the shiny new thing that
but you can't avoid the shiny new thing. You need the shiny new thing. If you're not the shiny new thing, you're not going to get
I mean, so like more classically, I guess this would be being tempted by the sirens on the rocks.
Yes.
So you're like, that's a good idea. Is it a good idea? Like you really need to. And like you say, I think as long as you have your North Star, your end goal, and that's my Alexa chiming in. As long as you have that, then you can take these little swerves and curves and make sure you land where you're supposed to.
We've got to be nimble. We've got to tack and jibe our way through the process. I think that's really the crux of it. Is like strategy. What's the thing? A plan never survives contact with the enemy. I think that kind of metaphor definitely applies to whether you're a publisher or whether you're a game developer. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is the hardest thing in the world. We're trying to make content that is also technology, that is also narrative, that is also art, that is also interactive, that's a verb. This is the hardest thing in the world. It's the second worst thing in the world to do. The worst thing in the world being not making games. And on that note, I am going to thank Stuart very much for participating. This has been your Game Dev London podcast. We've been talking about the different perspectives from a publisher and a developer, and particularly what it's like being CEOs, trying to run companies, and the strains and stresses of that in a market that is so tumultuous as we've had to face over the last 12 months. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this, then please like, subscribe, all the usual stuff that you would do at these experiences, but also check out our amazingly active Discord community who are there. And they're people like you, people who just love game development, people who just want to talk about game development. So come and join us and be part of that. On that note, Stuart, thank you so very much.
Thank you.